This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Good evening, everyone. This is the Easthampton City Council Ordinance Committee meeting for March 25th at 5:05 p.m. We're starting. Thank you, everyone, for being here. The topic that we are going to be discussing this evening is the short-term rental ordinance that we've been working on. Yeah, we will get to that in just a minute, but for right now, we have some meeting minutes that we can approve. The first one is for January 23rd, 2025. I'll take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
Great. All in favor, or
Aye.
any discussion?
No.
All in favor? Aye. Great. And then the second one is for, there's actually two sets, even though it was one recorded meeting, just for the sake of kind of breaking up the discussion. And both of those were for March 11th, 2025. I'll take a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Abstain. Okay, great. So now we will open it up for public speak. Is there anyone here who is interested in speaking about anything this evening?
Do you want to?
Oh, no, I was waving. I was waving.
Oh, okay.
All right, great. So we will open up the meeting to talk about the short-term rental of residential properties, the draft.
I'm sorry, just for the point of the record, can we just do a go around of who should be included as in this meeting?
Sure.
Okay.
Sal Derby.
Bonnie Denham.
Allison Manuel.
Do
You want us to do a little sign?
yeah, we should do, everyone can introduce themselves. Rocky,
Oh,
we can-
okay. Yeah, I'm Rocky Mariani Pearl. I'm a host
For people to sign in, so you don't have to.
and a pretty dynamic person to start with, but we'll start with host.
We'll have everyone sign in too, but just so we have everyone's name too.
I'm Liz Fluff. I'm the community social worker here in the public health department.
Erin Solomons, I'm a host.
Julia Wojciechowski, I'm a host and Easthampton resident.
Carl Prawl, concerned citizen.
Katrina Pearson, a host and
Are we doing Jenny? Oh, Katrina, sorry.
Edward Zero, child resident and a host.
John Lucido, host.
Cindy Kaufman.
Introduce yourself, and that's everybody. Okay. All right,
thank you, everyone.
great. So just as an update for everybody, I met with folks in the planning department, including our planning director, to go over the draft of the short-term rental. We had some discussions, made a couple of small edits to this. And the other thing that we did, I met with some hosts on Saturday and had a productive conversation. People were able to talk about their concerns, issues, etc. I also met with the fire chief, Chief Norris, this morning, and he discussed some of the items that he feels should be a requirement for the ordinance, as well as provided some clarification of what some of these things are, which may seem like, oh my God, these things are gonna be so expensive, but really they're like $20. And so, I will have him here, and the police chief at the next meeting, to be able to talk about some of their concerns first, but we can kind of go over and, talk about some of those, items. For now, I want to open it up to, the committee, who, received this, and if there's any questions or anything like that, Counselor Smith, I know you weren't here last meeting, and so if there's questions that you might have, and then we can, have that conversation. And again, just for anyone who might have come in late, I've written up here on some flip chart paper, if there's questions that you might have, if there's concerns that you might have with the current draft, or if there's things that are working, right? You can go ahead and put those down, and then what we'll be able to do is hopefully use these to be able to kind of manage some of the conversations that we might have this evening. But want to open it up to counselors if there's anything that, you're kind of thinking at this particular moment.
I'm ready more to listen.
Okay.
For this first meeting. Yeah.
So just a quick thing on 4-50.3 registration required. E, generally in the ordinance, we want to be specific and clear about what we're asking for. I don't know if we want to say at a minimum. I think we just say it should include this.
Uh-huh.
If we feel that it should include that, because, if there's more that should be included, we should say what more should be included.
Yeah, I think when I was drafting this, the thought process was that there might be another entity overseeing the registration process, and that it could give a little bit of latitude to define that process a bit more. But I mean, I don't really have a concern with striking the.
Yeah, that was just one thought. If it's an ordinance, we should probably, the other thing, it's this, there's not a ton, I like the changes here. It's pretty clear. I noticed ADUs didn't get mentioned unless I missed it. But I feel like it was kind of addressed in the fact that you can use any thing. I'm just wondering if we want to specifically say that are allowed.
I think we did.
Did we? Did I miss it?
Definition of short-term.
Yeah.
You have someone trying to join the meeting.
Oh.
Sorry, it's all right.
Okay. Yeah, I see it there. I just wanted to make sure that we
Yeah, it
had it
was,
clear.
it was one of those things that there was disagreement on the drafters, whether or not to include them, but it is currently in there.
That's all I have.
Excuse me, Connie, do you guys have a handout? You're handing out the thing?
We just brought a couple of extra
Oh, okay.
copies.
Is this the same thing we were
Yeah,
using the
it's
other day?
same thing
Okay,
that
got
we
it.
have,
Thank you.
that we were using on over the weekend.
Thank you.
It's also attached to the agenda if anyone is looking for it. So online, if you are looking at it, you go to the agenda for this evening, it's attached to that document. Any other thoughts, comments?
That was all I had.
Anything that you want to add if it's something important?
I just want to make note of things that after our discussion were sort of left as needing additional discussion with a wider group perhaps.
Yep.
Have the number of days relative to non-owner occupied rentals, the number of days or stays that they might be permitted was one area. The specific provisions for fire code and building code, if any, that were to be listed, and parking. the number of off-street parking spaces. Towards,
I do have one very quick question, if that's all right. When we're talking about standards and limitations, the B, the only registering to operate one dwelling. So if you have like a primary residence and an ADU, and you wanted to Airbnb your ADU, you would not be able to say, well, when I want to be able to offer my larger residence for bigger groups and then stay in my ADU. So not having being rented out concurrently, but like, so you'd have flexibility if you wanted to rent a smaller space or the bigger space. I don't think that would be allowed, right?
the way it's written now, it wouldn't. It's based on the registry. So you can only register one.
One. I don't know if that's a thing.
Is there a reason why it would need to be done that way?
The idea was just to limit the, like, so you don't get somebody coming in and buying up multiple properties to use for this purpose. It kind of limits it to the personal, more personal use.
I was just indicating about the concept of if you have an ADU and a primary residence, is there a reason why they could not make the choice? I mean, I know people who live in Lenox who specifically move into their tiny, their tiny dwelling that they have in the backyard so that they can rent out their primary residence during peak season. It seems odd to limit so long as they're going to remain as living on the property. It shouldn't matter which one of the two units they're living in if they are on site.
So that's a question I think we'll explore, right? So you said that was in Lenox, Mass.
In Lenox, that definitely happens.
So we'll take a peek at what they have.
I think we need to keep returning to the owner occupied like delineation about it, because for me, I have a ownership interest in my mother's house. I don't live there. I just bought it with her to help her buy it. So like she has an Airbnb in her house. I might want to have an Airbnb at my house. Like I feel like both of them are owner occupied. I just have an ownership interest in the way it's written right now. I wouldn't be able to register the one in my personal house because I have an ownership interest in her house, but they're both owner occupied. So just to kind of think that out.
I have a quick question. If it's just with the language around the cap at 50 total dwelling units. So how many units do we have right now?
That's a,
37 according to the Department of Revenue, but 47 according to the way that the building inspector found some
Yeah.
data. I don't know how that works. Maybe because some of us have more than one.
Okay, so I guess I was wondering if it's over 50, how is it decided which 50 are chosen? And would that be renewed each year so everyone would have an opportunity to do that? Or would it be a lottery, or would it be first come, first serve?
I don't think that we have,
Okay, so it's just something still to be
yeah,
determined.
I mean, I don't know if it's you have it till you lose it, or there's a waiting list, or you go to re-register and, you know, you've had multiple complaints and then the licensing board says, sorry, you're lost your.
The other question that I had related to that, like I have 5 adults in my household. We're all one family. Could we have 5 separate units within the city, or is it one per household?
It's based on ownership.
Ownership?
Yeah.
Well, okay,
If
so.
it's only you and your partner that are the owners, then your
Mhm.
other family members. have
Okay,
separate-
I wasn't sure, for example, and I don't, but if I had 5 rentals in the city, I couldn't just say, okay, kid number 1, you're gonna manage this one, kid number 2, and so it would have to be separate. Okay, that's all.
I appreciate you clarifying though that you don't have 5 different residents at your house.
Yeah, don't worry, yeah.
I just
Thank
like
you
to
for that clarification.
say that this is, I hope we talk about, I don't know if we're talking about this more or is this our opportunity? Because this is of interest to me, obviously.
Mhm.
I have a short-term rental. I own the house next door. I have a short-term rental there too.
Mhm.
I would like to have more than one.
Mhm.
allowed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we're gonna make that decision tonight, right? I know that is, a concern,
Yep.
that's been expressed. But we will have that as a,
I'm just gonna keep beating the drum.
yeah, no, I hear you, I hear you. I understand that, back to your point, I understand the owner occupied piece. I don't know if we have the ability to delineate those things. That might be a conversation. All of this is gonna have to be vetted by the attorney at some point, and so I don't know if that's gonna make it more complicated in some way, if it's gonna make it more complicated to track. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Right.
I'm just saying.
I would propose that the owner occupied like homes aren't part of the count because that's like our personal space that we're choosing to share. It's a tool for subsidizing, and I would hate to have that tool shut off to someone else because they've hit the limit when it's in their own home. It's not like taking a house off inventory in their own home.
Sure.
I would, if those could be not part of the count, guest rooms in your own house, I don't feel like should go towards the total count.
Yeah, and we can figure that out, but everything else applies,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
And so
right, no,
that's
no.
where I think it gets a little, so I just don't want to. I want it to be manageable, whatever it is that
Yeah,
we.
yeah, but if you're registering it as owner, you know.
Yeah. No, I get it. I like that. More than one, do people have thoughts about one, more than one? I
Like
think
whether
that
somebody can have more than one?
Yeah, I think that's the conversation that I have and that I'm asking the council members right now, if,
Sorry,
yeah, no, you're good, you're good.
generally asking.
Yeah, no, I was putting it back to the,
I think that raises a lot more other questions when you say more than one. Now you have to lay down rules about all the more than one scenarios. So I have a property that's big enough to possibly have two.
Mhm.
And I would be the owner occupied person on the property that would have two short-term rentals on the property. Are you then going to allow people to just live in Easthampton, have a short-term rental on their property, but also buy a house over here and have a short-term rental on that property over there? So that's a different style. Or can I also rent my ADU on my property and rent a room in my house? Should I register that separate? And does that count towards the 50? There's a lot.
yes, yeah. So coming back to you all, and it would be really helpful that since I know this isn't typically how we do this, because I know there's a lot of people who have an invested interest, but let me call on you just so I can manage the discussion, right? That would be super helpful. So coming back to,
In regard, I agree with if it's in your house, it shouldn't be included in the same way. And I think because of that, it would be two, right? Would it not be included at all if your owner in that space, if it's owner occupied, you're saying that rental wouldn't count, but one other rental from that would be okay? Is that where we're at? Am I speaking it clearly? I don't think I am.
I'm more the
I
total
think that's
number.
what I just said.
Yeah, you're
Okay.
saying if
Okay.
there's.
You have an
someone
apartment
that's
on your
desperate.
property, you rent it, but you maybe sometimes would like to rent a room in that house that's also on that same property.
Okay, yeah, because I was even thinking of a lot of examples of parents who move to a smaller house within our community and they're renting it out to their children or someone that they know, their previous house still may need more income for that one.
if you're, can you mute yourself, whoever is on it? I hear someone sending messages and I'm hearing that sound. So if you could mute yourself, that would be great.
Like I think the ability to have the rental within your own house is necessary, and I think people should be able to have more than one room rented if that's what they want in their personal dwelling.
I do just want to clarify, so there's no limit on room number
Yeah.
other than what's like legally bedroom for building code purposes and health code purposes. And wouldn't be any restriction on non-short-term rentals, so anything over 28 days, that cap wouldn't apply in any way. So you could have, your accessory dwelling unit that you rent out on a month-to-month lease, that wouldn't count towards that wouldn't be a short-term rental. The way it's written now. Sorry.
Right. No, that was great. I think the only restriction there is, and it's not a restriction per se, but let's say you have 3 rooms and you have 6 people, you have to have different requirements within the house, right? You have to have sprinklers and all of those various things, right? So I think that's a restriction sort of, right? That you have to, or guidelines, or, that you have to follow, right? So just to be clear about that. Oh, yeah, code requirements. That's
So-
the word I'm looking for.
I mean, I have a thought, which is, maybe we look at properties as, the catch, which is, it doesn't matter how many buildings are on the property. If you're gonna, like, so if you had a ADU and you had a house and you wanted to do similar to what Lennox does, like you want to live in your ADU while you rent out your house, or maybe you have a small group coming in and you want to live in your house and rent out your ADU, considering that since it's on the same property as one. And if you have conjoining properties, so if you own the house that's like on, like, next door to you, maybe that would be considered to be on the same property. I don't know, that's something we could discuss. I think that could be potentially a slippery slope if we talk about people owning multiple short-term rentals around the city, just because we don't necessarily want people buying houses and taking them off the market for short-term rentals. I think that's kind of the point of having an ordinance. So that could be tricky, but but I think that there are ways to make it so we give flexibility to owners to have on their own property the flexibility that they need to do what they need to do and not necessarily endanger the housing stock to, just to come to a short-term rentals. So I don't exactly know how that would work perfectly right now, but I think looking at the property is a start.
I think one of the concerns actually that was brought up this weekend was, and it's been discussed elsewhere, of hypothetically someone from Northampton buying a property in Easthampton. They have no connection here whatsoever, and they're renting that out as a short-term rental, right? Like, I think that's what we're questioning some of that. And the other question, I think, is, do people have to be an Easthampton resident? Are there restrictions or anything around that of you have to be a resident of Easthampton in order to run or have a short-term rental in Easthampton? I don't know if that's legal. Yeah, so that's what, yeah. So, but that was a question. Right, that was just a question.
My biggest concern there would be that the group that would be left out would be any adult kids who suddenly inherited their parents' house and don't live here. They're not ready to put it on the market yet and are using that as a possible kind of safe hold until they do sell the house. So I think that's one thing I'd be worried about if it was only people who live in Easthampton.
I saw your hand, and then your hand.
Well, I guess I was just going to mention, I'm looking to buy a home in Easthampton, and it's extremely difficult to find property. But one of the things I'm hearing here are people who are renting out guest rooms, renting out ADUs on their own property. Like, that doesn't feel like it's competing with me trying to find a home in the community. That said, anybody getting a second home or a property adjacent to theirs and taking that off the market does feel like a threat to me being able to afford a home in the community. So you're also talking about, capping the number at 50 dwelling units. Immediate question that came to me there was, where's the equity on anybody who doesn't happen to have property and money at this point to be able to buy that? What are we talking about? The next generation be able to get into it. If it's just you have a rental property, you keep it, that's a problem. I know Salem just mentioned, how do you, it might be illegal to say, if you're not in Easthampton, resident to have, one of these rentals. Well, if, those 50 slots or however many are decided very much goes in an equitable way in which you're not guaranteed that you're going to get that license in the next year. This is no longer seen as a profit venture. You're not turning housing into, a way to make a living as a side thing. You can still rent out guest rooms, still rent out ADUs, but it's not taking stock off, and it's not incentivizing somebody from Northampton to come in, because they're not going to know if they're going to have a license the next year to be able to have their Airbnb, because somebody from the community might have the points, or however you decide to hash that out. Anyway, some thoughts.
Appreciate that.
I mean, as somebody who already has a unit and have already made the investment, I would be very upset if I were to have that taken away from me at this point. I mean, I made a considerable investment in creating a fully furnished rental. It's not a small undertaking. I think most of us can agree. If you're going to put together a nice place, that's a really expensive thing to do. I don't really know about this, like this idea that we can could or should only have 50, because even amongst the whatever number we have, whether it's 37 or 47 or 52 right now, I think we can all tell you we're nowhere near all booked up all the time. It's this very fleeting thing, which is one of the reasons why so many of us are concerned about limiting like the quote unquote number of guests we can have, stays we can have over the course of the month. A lot of people are only staying for 2 nights, sometimes even 1. So if you're saying, well, you can only have 2 or 3 of those in a month, you might be telling us that we literally have 3 nights of occupancy, and that seems really unfair. So if you really wanted to look at, if you were going to look at a limit at all, it should be about a number of nights, not a number of parties coming through. And I'm not excited about a limit, period, but definitely not this like 3 stays per month. That would be really devastating for a lot of us if that were the case.
Yeah, in general, I just think, because it sounds like everybody has different scenarios they're worried about, and talking about like, should we have more than 1 unit? Everybody has all these different personal cases, which sounds like an impossible task for you all in the town to like figure out how to legislate for 1 million cases. So in my mind, the helpful framework would be to work backwards from thinking like, what are the, just to use a simple word, what are the evils that we're trying to protect against? And then work back from there. And I think it seems pretty clear that most people are worried about investors using this as an opportunity for investment where there's no connection to the town, where there's no home ownership. Sounds like that's something that is a worry amongst people. So then you could work backwards and say, what are the guardrails we can put in place that will prevent that from happening? And I don't think it follows that preventing people from having 2 Airbnbs will prevent that. But what would prevent that is saying like, if your unit is run by a company and not by you, or if you do not live in the house, or if you, if you're an investor, there's many ways to carve it out, but then you have like a pretty severe limit on how many nights you could rent, and that will right away take away the profit motive, and it'll kind of eliminate that issue. But what you just pointed out about the occupancy, I think I pointed out in a letter to you guys that you can look up all of this data through AirDNA and Data Rabu. Like the average occupancy rate is like 50 to 60% in Easthampton. So there's not a big profit motive that exists. And so we should just think about like, what is the evil and how to prevent it? I just think if you say no more than 1 Airbnb, you might inadvertently hurt somebody like Lindsay, who has this like pretty unique case, but it's very harmless. It's like her mom has a unit in her house and she's helping her mom, and she wants to have a unit in her house, but they own both houses. They actually live in Easthampton. and they're just renting a room in their house to help pay some rent, and they're doing it all above board. So you might inadvertently hurt them or something, or the case where somebody, a family member has to like move away and they can't sell the house because they might need it, but they need to pay the bills and maybe they do it for a little bit. And those people aren't creating the evils that everybody's worried about. So I just think as a general framework, it's like, we're worried about investors, we're worried about public nuisance, we're worried about safety. And then can we just work back from there and see like, what are the actual drivers of irresponsible investor activity? What are the actual drivers of safety issues? And, you know, I think the limit on the total number of units seems very misguided, because it doesn't specifically address an evil. It just is kind of a blunt instrument solving a problem that may or may not even exist. So I would just ask like, why? Because I have an ADU that I have an Airbnb in, but what if I travel 1 month every summer, and for that month I want to like Airbnb it? Like, nobody's going to come live in my house, and I'm certainly not going to rent it to anybody for that month. If I've followed all the rules, am I creating a public evil there? I don't think so, but under some rules, I might not be allowed to do that. So that's my take.
Thank you.
A few similar things I just want to bring up. So this part about the limitations and trying to make the rules around who gets them, and if there is a cap, I would like to make sure that something gets written in here about that the people who, I think there should be some sort of preference by chronological order, the people who have been doing it the longest and invested in it the longest, because some of the things we haven't talked about here yet is the positive influence that these bring in regards to Easthampton in the form of there is no hotels. So people do want to come here to visit their families. And I went back into my reviews last night so I could look that up and talk about the people who, I had my hardwood floors done, so I stayed here, and it was amazing. Whatever, this person lives in my neighborhood like 7 houses down the street, didn't even know I existed. And then looked it up and was like, is that the guy with the lights? So, and then a lot of folks come to visit. They're the grandparents of people who have children down the street. I personally check my people in personally and keep them in Easthampton for the restaurant scene. I have tons of reviews. I have 500 reviews. So I keep people in Easthampton. So I had unbelievable amounts of reviews that talk about Easthampton. I have a friend who is a realtor who lives in Easthampton. I have a stack of her business cards. People come to Easthampton. I can prove that people who came to my Airbnb bought a house in Easthampton. So there's a positive influence that they bring to Easthampton that we just shouldn't be overlooked in the big picture of what's happening in regards to in the whole picture of all of it.
Yeah, I think we tried to capture that in the purpose, right? I think we also added, right, support local tourism in a sustainable manner, promote Easthampton as a welcoming community, right? We tried to include some of those things that were brought up last time. And so I think that that's really great, actually. So
I
I think
actually wrote that over there. We're working. I wrote 451 through 5. Great. That's exactly what I think.
yeah, so I think
it's wonderful.
we tried to capture kind of the intent, right, of why some of you are doing this. Also just on the personal level, right, of being able to have that, right? So I think that's where we're good. I know another big concern that people talk about, I'm gonna discuss these. I think this was something that Chief Norris, the fire chief, wanted to have included in this, and so this is something that we can add in here. he gave kind of a little bit of a list of things that he wanted. He said some of these are, and I can go through what's encouraged. But the first few here, there's several, he actually said that he would like to have these in the ordinance, and I'm just gonna read them right now. He would like to have annual inspections conducted by the fire department with associated fees and service, which we do address in here in terms of, it's registered annually, but some of those would be included within that. At least one 5-pound multi-purpose extinguisher located near each exit and on each level of habitation. He said that those were not overly expensive, but affordable. Yep. Fully stocked first aid kit. Again, not overly expensive, right? Smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors that comply with Massachusetts 527 CMR 1.00. That is not, those are just smoke detectors, right? They're not wired or anything like that, right? There is some
Well,
building
In
codes.
some houses, they have to be wired.
Yes.
Does that even need to be said? Because we wouldn't have a certificate of occupancy anyway.
Oh, right. I'm just saying, this is.
Yeah,
what
no, I hear you.
yeah,
I just, it's funny to me that some of this stuff is so redundant. It's like, it's like we wouldn't be living in the house. We wouldn't have a CO. So why does, it's just funny that people, it's part of the vilification of the STR thing. It's like,
No, but if houses haven't sold for a long time, they could have smoke
No one
detectors
has
that are out of
inspected my
compliance.
house for 30 years.
Yeah, then they would be out of
My house,
compliance.
my
right,
regular
but you,
house.
you couldn't start your
Okay.
Airbnb till you got the CO.
Okay, so, yeah, so I think that for someone who's new, I think it's just clear that
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
what he's saying he wants in here, right? Proper house numbering per city ordinance, but that's obviously city ordinance. Signage, signage that is laminated and near all means of egress, outlining occupancy, evacuation routes, et cetera, et cetera. Right, I know some people were like, put that on the wall, like, he's just saying, put it up if you got it that weekend, take it down if you don't got it, you
Yeah.
don't want it visible. So I think those were some of the things that he was, in event of emergency, dial 911, number of non-emergencies and 24-hour contact number of actual owner of property, right? Now, those were the things that he wanted to see in there, right? What he said, what he recommends, right, is residential lockbox is encouraged to assist in gaining access. I know people have different feelings about that, but he said it's gonna save potentially thousands of dollars of them not having to bust down a door or break a window or have anything like that replaced, right? So
So we're
And-
supposed to give a lockbox code to the,
I think it would be registered, yeah. Any outdoor burning such as campfires, cooking fires, fire department notification and permission need to be obtained. Any multi-unit building, apartment buildings is only able to have one unit designated as a short-term rental unit. That's his recommendation, but we're working through that. A landline, an automatic fire suppressor mounted above stove, oven, kitchen stove. And apparently this is just recommended, but also he said that that's just a $20 canister that you just sits above the thing and kind of comes down. But those are the ones that I outlined, are the things that he would like to see in the ordinance.
sprinklers.
Sprinklers.
You can't.
That is if, you have smoke detectors for 5 or fewer people in the house. If you have 6 or more, you have to have a sprinkler system, and that's by code.
Wait, what?
Building codes.
People or like, so, I mean, I have a 3-bedroom.
Okay, so if you have 5 people in the house, you just have to have the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide. If you allow for 6, you have to have a sprinkler system, and that's by code.
So every single rental in all of Easthampton if it has occupancy room for more than 6 people, no matter whether it is an apartment or a condominium or a single family house, has to have sprinklers in it.
Yes.
If it's a rental,
If it's a rental.
not a short-term rental.
A
but
short-term,
rental.
we're talking short-term rental.
So
Yeah, transient.
why? That's a big deal.
It is, and was adopted in 2005, and that's what the regulation is?
I think there's,
Sorry,
no, I'm sorry.
you had your hand up?
Again, I'm gonna go back to my ADU was inspected by a fire inspector and it had 6 beds in it when he came.
Yep, I can answer that actually, because I spoke to him today and he said there are other instances of those things happening in the city. So all I can say as the fire chief is I have to, on this date, tell you,
Yes.
you need to have a sprinkler system.
Yeah.
And whatever documentation you have or anything like that, you can appeal that.
Yeah. So that's actually what I was gonna say. I have a little bit more.
Yep.
They adopted it in 2005 and it's in the Easthampton building code, but it's not in the ordinances. The building code is separate. Yeah, okay, I didn't get to look that up yet. So I am just to let everybody know, I'm gonna get back to everybody on the next meeting, but I am the operations manager of the Bombic Center. And I'm working with the fire company there, fire sprinkler company. We're having them installed in our building. So I'm having someone over in the next week to talk about, I don't know if you guys read this code, but if there is not adequate water pressure, then you don't need to have them. And I'm gonna also get a quote to see how much they cost. And they do install them in apartments. It is true. I just don't think that it's been enforced in Easthampton. It's an unfortunate fallout of what happens when the dust starts to fly. So I will have more information about what that entails, water pressure testing. I'll let you know what my quote is for installation and whether I'm gonna put that my Airbnb only sleeps 5.
Yep. All right. So you had a question?
Oh, no, I just, there's some confusion. I was just, in case it's helpful to anybody, it's not the building code. It's the Massachusetts general law. So it's a Massachusetts law that specifies this. It's referenced in the building code. But there's a court case. I personally don't have the 6-person thing, but there is some confusion as to whether the lodging house is defined as individual tenants versus a family that comes to rent your place, and you can appeal to the Massachusetts Sprinkler Appeals Board. So, but it's a Massachusetts law. It's not an Easthampton thing, just so nobody directs their ire in the wrong place.
So you're saying the
Whoa, I want to, this feels like an outside of this conversation.
Yeah, okay.
So I just
Fair.
want to bring us back, right? Yes, it is something that we've adopted as a city, and so that's something that we have to follow, right? I want to come back to some of the questions that we have in front of us in terms of number of stay, things of that nature. Do we have comments that we want to address to that? Or things that we would like to see in here?
I have to say, I agree that simpler is better. I mean, if we're not fixing a problem that exists, why do we need to include it? So, I like some things clean and simple. So I would be fine with just striking, portions of, some of these things. Even the cap. Like, I'd be fine with striking the cap, honestly, because the market can only bear a certain number of units.
Yes.
So it would be, I think, intrinsically limited by demand. And the other thing I think potentially be struck would be the owner may only registering one dwelling. I think we don't think that's a huge issue. I mean, I think we could say that if they can use a third party to manage the rental, but the registration should be in their name. But I don't have a problem with, and honestly, the X separate stays per month, I think we could strike that too. It's just my this moment. Because I don't see it necessarily solving any problem. Just 3 things.
So if we don't limit it, and I come in, I buy 7 things and I get a third party to manage it.
Well, I think that would potentially go to the, corporation, like making sure that, I don't think we should strike those parts, like this part, they cannot be owned by a corporation.
But I'm an individual.
Well, I mean, imagine if you're gonna, well, I don't know, so if that's an issue, then we would try to solve that. But I don't necessarily,
Be a good mark, sorry. Good
Yeah.
investment.
yeah, I don't know if it would be a good investment.
Oh, I know, I'm just saying. I've been told that Easthampton's not a destination,
But
but.
you wouldn't be able to buy.
Not that much.
I don't know if you're gonna be spending like, $400,000.
Or 50% rental of the year.
For getting.
Might as well get a hotel at that point.
So maybe there's another way we address, a single owner owning, multiple houses.
I don't care, the non-owner.
Sorry.
And then maybe, I think that's potentially how we do it. Non-owner.
Counselor Smith, you got comments?
I'm just trying to keep up with what you just said. Maybe there's another way to address the non-owner occupied.
Well, just like, someone buying up a bunch of houses and turning them into short rentals.
Yep.
Maybe they're just a bad business person and they think that's a good idea. But maybe we link that to owner occupied. So if you're owner occupied, you can, on your property, you can have a short-term rental in your ADU. You can have one in your main residence. Like, register it as one.
Oh, say your hand first.
If it's owner occupied, why does that? I think the only risk is when you have somebody investing in short-term rental property. While there might be or situational issues with owner occupied, at least that way you have a resident living on site, even if it's only 11 months out of the year. And then there's no enforcement either. I mean, because if you're limiting the number of stays, who's keeping track of that? Who's tallying? It seems like it's only going to be an issue if it is an issue. So as long as there's the nuisance, or basically all the fine print about not being a detriment to our community, then that doesn't feel like an issue. But it does feel like an issue if there isn't some sort of control on non-owner occupied short-term rentals. That feels like where it would go after having it.
I think I saw your hand up.
This is a detail. So when I did my accessory dwelling unit, I made a corporation. Only because I wanted to do it. I got a lawyer and I wanted to do it right in the realm of being a property owner, and I had to deed my property over to deed this. What was used to be a barn is now a house. So I deeded the property and I started an LLC. So I guess the wording about that, in other words, I don't own any of the properties. But I get saying corporation means that somebody who owns 100 apartments in Springfield can buy 5 here. That's all I'm saying.
Yep.
I own a corporation
This is LLC.
and it owns those 2 houses.
It does allow for.
Yeah.
LLC is fine, as long as it's not a.
It's a limited liability company. It's actually.
Right,
not for
okay,
tax
fair.
purposes,
Yeah.
it's a different structure.
You wanted to say something that's.
I don't know. I think I just really appreciate Carl's comments, and I think it is the owner occupied. I think we all are in agreement. We don't want anyone coming and buying 7 houses in our. And this is what I was gonna say. In terms of the equity and why, another reason I don't think we should cap it is I just don't think it would be fair because it'd be these golden licenses, and then someone else is having like an income issue, and they're like, God, I'd really like to rent out a room in my house. And it's like, nope, sorry, us 50 first people through the door are like holding them all. It just doesn't feel right. It feels equitable. Anyone can do it if it's on your own property.
I saw your hand.
Yeah, and I do think that the supply and demand is gonna dictate whether or not somebody's gonna end up doing it for very long. I will say that I do have 2, and my situation is kind of personal, but I lived in a house, and my partner and I purchased the place next door, and I renovated it from top to bottom. And one was a long-term tenant, and one was an Airbnb. And then separated, and I moved into that apartment
above it and then kept the Airbnb because I was able to sustain it. We owned another 2-family that I needed to renovate, and I renovated it. I'm not rich. I'm a retired public school teacher. I'm not a corporation. I'm a single person now, and I have two-family properties, with one that I live in with an Airbnb next door, and the other one with a long-term tenants who are lovely and an Airbnb downstairs. And it benefits me because I'm retired. I don't have a lot of income, and I take care of all of it myself. And so when you start to talk about like we should cap it at 1 or owner occupied or this or that, I'm like, okay, well, that was kind of my retirement plan. So now I'm a little bit scared, but I don't want to be, I also want to be fair. So if I have to take it in the shorts, that stinks. I don't want to. I don't know how to advocate for this without it sounding like I'm being selfish. So that's what I'm just putting that out there. I don't know how else to.
I appreciate it. And again, I think the original conversation around capping had to do with trying to preserve our long-term housing stock for people in Easthampton who want to be able to stay in Easthampton.
Yeah.
And if everybody switches, goes to short, well, I'm not gonna go long-term, I'm gonna do short-term because it's more convenient this way.
Right.
And I'm using the word convenient
Yeah.
because I don't have to worry about.
Right. And I'm within 1 block of the other one. So literally, my neighbors all know me. I drive my electric lawnmower down the street to go mow the other lawn, and everyone waves. They're like, "There goes Rocky." You know. So,
Great.
yeah.
So again, I just want to be clear, like, I think there's multiple kind of constituents, right?
Yeah,
That we're
there's a
thinking
lot.
about, like, we want to make sure that we don't box out our
Existing people who are trying to stay
who
in
are trying
Easthampton.
to stay here, or many of whom, right, some of whom, right now are being pushed out of
Yeah.
their long-term housing situation, right? And so I think that's just something that we're trying to be cognizant of as
I totally appreciate
we're
it.
like, hey, this is really great. We want to help you. And then like, oh, we just like jacked a whole nother
No, I don't want to do
population,
that.
right? You had your hand up and then I'll come to you.
Just getting back to trying to come up with how to solve the problem we're worried about. A couple suggestions. One is like, I mean, I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes in this room, but one just idea is you could say just like point blank, if you don't have residence in Easthampton, you cannot buy a property in short-term rental. That would be like full stop. You cannot live in Northampton, buy a house, because that's going to eliminate the person that solely buys a house just for Airbnb. And I know people have been doing that. Like, to be honest, before this discussion came up, I was looking around trying to do that. But we also can't deny that there's a difference between the person that lives in another state or another town, buys a house here only for that, and Rocky, who owns a house and is a resident of Easthampton, a tax-paying citizen of Easthampton, and also owns another property. So it seems there's a difference. That could be one idea, is just say you cannot buy a house to short-term rental if you don't live here. Another option would be if you live in your house, you Airbnb in that, but then you buy another one because you're an Easthampton resident and you want to Airbnb it. Maybe you're different because you actually live in Easthampton, but maybe we put a pretty big kneecap on how many nights a year you can do that, because that will put a big, limit again on like investor activity. That they're just thoughts. And then I just want to echo, because it's very important, against the total cap. I think it's needless, and also might generate, it's a lot of inequity, as people said, but also could generate a situation where like, the 50 people that are there, they have no incentive to improve their quality because they're the only 50 that can ever exist in Easthampton. Whereas all of us, like every host here, I know does a really good job. And when I signed up, I was like, wow, I have to up my game. And I made my property better. I make sure that I'm doing good with my neighbors. I make sure that I'm good with my guests, and I make sure to like do a good job. So there could be, I'm just saying it could generate this, there's unintended consequences to the limit. And limiting nights of stays, I think, will create needless oversight challenges for the town. As long as we're following the rules, we should assume that every night should be a peaceful, safe night.
So to that effect, I against limiting the nights of stays. I think I've said that a lot. But if I know Lindsay's talking, or people talked about owner occupied might be different. And if we're worried about investors coming in, maybe those are the ones that get capped. How many? I personally, I am a resident. I have more than one. Maybe if you're going to let me have more than one, you cap what that number is. Then I can't buy 10, right?
I can't
I
buy
thought
10.
that you might do that,
And
actually.
you would
but-
not put that past me because I am an entrepreneur.
You did say that. Having heard that comment about what's here now.
Yeah, I'm still kind of thinking the cap would go. Because it just opens a hornet's nest of how do we manage that? And
Yeah,
like I said, I think it's
yearly, and then you're trying to.
so I'm fine with the cap. I'm fine with the cap. Saying bye.
Yeah, I haven't heard a really convincing argument for the cap.
And I want to be clear also, I'm interrupting you, sure. A lot of people in this room right now are hosts and in favor, and that's great. I want to be mindful that there's a lot of not voices in opposition to this. So when this goes to a public hearing and things like that, we may hear differing opinions. So I just want to say that. So it just made me think of that one. Thanks. Do you have more, Councilor Smith?
No, I was just wanting to have that reiterated, what would be the purpose of 50 and why 50? Is that just an arbitrary number that was put there?
Yeah, again, I think it originally came from trying to preserve our long-term housing stock. I think that was the big concern.
So I understand what you were saying about the difference between a corporation versus an individual, but I'm just curious, how would that look on paper if you're looking at John's? So John has three dwellings on the one property.
Just my house and the ADU.
Okay, I thought I heard you say you owned 3. So if he owns 2 and that's a corporation, that's okay because it's an LLC. But if it was an outside investor, would we only assume the outside investor would be a really large company, or could it be even an individual coming in from outside? That's where I'm still a little confused.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. And I don't know how to fix that.
Mhm.
And I'm looking to you.
Well, there is just a different structure for incorporating as a business, whether it's an LLC versus like an S corp, or there's legal definitions.
So we can figure out how to write that in to protect this.
I think it kind of is written in. The only, I guess, maybe difference is if you're a local resident and for some reason you choose to be a corporation, but like for tax structuring, like you wouldn't want to be a corporation unless you've got a significant amount of assets that you're, so.
But in terms of, to your point, like what's preventing someone from Northampton or Texas, right? Buying a property and saying, well, I'm an LLC now, and then.
Well, regardless if it's an LLC or not, that's a very different scenario to me, having someone from Texas who happens to purchase a property here for short-term rental purposes versus someone living here, and even someone in Northampton. Like, that's a lot more understandable to me than someone from another state.
Well,
I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, there might be a scenario where I moved to Easthampton in the summertime and I thought, wow, love it. And then February rolled around and I was like, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. I'm going back.
To Tucson,
Texas.
Arizona. That's where I came from. I think about it all the
I think
time.
that's what I'm trying to
So
like
the
prevent.
current appeal before the zoning board of appeals is a family that lives in Ojai, California. They're from here, so they do come back to visit family and stay in their home, but they live and their address and everything is in California. So they still have local ties, but they're not residents.
Your hand, Ed?
Which that is me. My family.
Oh,
To be upfront about that. So yeah, I live here. I'm the daughter. I have lived here for many years. I own a local business. Whatever. I am a resident. I'm the one taking care of it. It's a situation where the house would sit empty if it wasn't being used for that purpose. Empty when my family is not here. My family comes all the time. I have many immediate family all over the country. I have a sister who lives here with young kids. I'm here. So family and friends coming in and out of the house all the time. When it's not being used for that, we short-term rental it. Even if the house were available all the time, it would still only be 50% at a maximum. It's probably only 30% because there really just isn't the demand here. It's never going to be a business. It's just to fill the space and help pay the bills when someone's not there. But because there's none of that here, and I am a local business owner, a restaurant, I do want people to stay in this town when they come to the venues, because we have wedding venues, we have, funerals, unfortunately, that are here. We like so many things that bring people to town. So I am that situation, and it is a situation where it's not impacting the housing market whatsoever. The house would sit empty if not being used. It gets a lot more upkeep because people are staying there. My neighbors love it. They get to meet tons of interesting people. A lot of local residents who, are renovating their home and need to stay, or, their families coming from Connecticut to celebrate Chinese New Year, like for a week, So I understand that we want to treat it as a separate thing, but I wish there was a way that we could address, is it actually affecting the housing market or not? Because a lot of these situations, even though my family's in California, are not.
Great. I saw your hand and then I'll.
So you had addressed the fact that later on, we're probably going to hear more from the people who are in opposition for the short-term rentals. And I seem to remember there was a citation in one of the letters that you read last time about a house in particular that had 40 calls into the fire chief. It seems that it might be prudent in your model of thinking that as part of this document that we're putting forward, that we have something in there that if you're not being a good owner of a short-term rental, you don't get to keep being an owner of a short-term rental, because that's where a lot of opposition comes from, when the neighbors have a really ugly negative experience because somebody is an absentee owner that maybe lives in another state and doesn't have a local family member, and they've just hired a random company to come and flip it and turn it. It feels really punitive to the rest of us to have that as if that's what's happening everywhere. The fire department has never come to my house while my guests have been there. Yep. Nor have the police been called. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are really great, and I think we understand that. I think that's why we talked about including the licensing board within this, so there is a public process and not just the building commissioner approves, cycles this through every year, and there's houses or short-term rentals that get complaints, but it never comes to any kind of public discourse, right, or public review, right? So there's that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the pieces that we have in here, which are under, inspection, compliance, penalties, would probably be used to address that. I guess my question is licensing board. So, which licensing board are we talking about?
We're talking about the licensing board.
So, the one that gives out liquor licenses,
Yes.
and okay.
So you can add to that, because I talked to the mayor about
I
it.
just wanted to make sure that I wasn't.
Yeah, you can't take anything away from the licensing board, but you can give them, right? And so the licensing board can cover entertainment, alcohol, car dealerships, taxis, and short-term rentals possibly.
Just wanted to make sure.
We asked that question. Come back to you and then back.
I was just on that note, would they be handling the enforcement of all the regulations that we're talking about? The licensing board be handling enforcement?
No, I think that would come, some of those pieces, like inspections and things like that, that would come from the fire department. The building inspector would be handling all the work, and so making sure that those things are in order.
And specifically, I'm talking about under 450.5A, like the excessive noise, that kind of stuff. Like who is enforcing any of that, I guess?
Well, I think the police would enforce that,
Okay.
right? But I'm sure that there would be note of that made, right? That when there was to come up for a renewal, then that would be kind of brought to included within the licensing board, and then the licensing board, because it would be a public meeting, all the neighbors who have to deal with that, right? If there's repeated offenses, right, would be able to come and to say, actually, please don't renew this because we deal with this situation all the time.
Yeah, I see it like the same as a liquor license. If there were violations, the, police are the first responders for the event, but the license commission down the line would have the final say with the registration itself. But yeah, code is always going to be the fire.
Answer your question. Yeah, great. You had
your hand up?
I didn't see your hand.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's okay. You can go. I can wait.
More of a question. So the licensing board is an Easthampton thing?
Yes.
Okay. And, has there been any more discussion? I'm sorry, I don't have the thing in front of me about like whether this would be a by right or a special permit? Assuming it gets in. Has there been any talk about that?
It's not in here. Yeah, we haven't talked about that
Okay.
yet.
I just heard the public meeting part of the licensing board and I was like, oh, is there a public meeting every time one of these gets established or?
Well, I think that's what we're saying. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Well, we haven't really decided
Yeah.
on that. That's sort of where initially there was a zoning and this general ordinance, and the zoning would create potentially a hearing process if we opted to push that forward. There will have to be a zoning amendment regardless to address the kind of ongoing appeal, but whether or not it requires an additional review is not decided yet.
Other hands for the, yep.
So, I just wanted to back up for a second. So, I'm the community social worker here. I'm in the public health department. I very much utilize Airbnbs in my own family. Nobody lives locally, so I'm not speaking necessarily in opposition. I just wanted to highlight, we do have a trend of, out-of-state investors and landlords, looking and purchasing properties here in Easthampton. We do have some who the actual owner of the property is in another state, but they are a registered something with an Easthampton address. So I just think there's going to have to be some pretty careful and specific language around, what a corporation versus an LLC versus an owner versus owner occupied. I just think it could really become a slippery slope for, I have heard from residents who have said, like, I am losing my apartment in an eviction because I think my landlord is getting into the business of Airbnbs, and like whether that's not true, it just has come up more recently because I think people are realizing that in Massachusetts, the landlord and tenant eviction situation can get a little ugly. And so Airbnbs are kind of nice because you don't have to deal with that. Like, I can't get this person out of my property. We've only agreed for a weekend stay kind of thing. So I just think, to that regard, if we do start seeing, or we do have concerns about out-of-staters starting to transition from like, I have an apartment building versus I'm going to make all these short-term rentals, and just the resident out-of-state piece could get a little tricky. So it's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and for those renters, I was talking to the fire chief today. So let's say they have, I'm just gonna make it really simple. They have a building with 4 apartments, right? same situation, if they have 6 people staying in there, all that has to be sprinkler set up and all of that too. So, that might be an issue for people who are,
You mean in terms of like financially, are people gonna wanna invest in doing all of that work just for the short term? Yeah,
I also think that we put in here that if it's a multifamily, only one, or like a multi-unit building, only one unit could be used as an Airbnb, so all the other ones would have to stay long term.
Definitely.
The challenge is if you have like an attached accessory dwelling unit. So it's technically like a 2-family, and then you want that scenario of being able to go back and forth.
You're not gonna rest one at the same time.
Yeah, and so you'd have to have the language regarding simultaneous renting.
yep, I'm sorry, I'm thinking and writing.
I just wanted to mirror that sentiment, like it's anecdotal, but I read about how BlackRock is using innocuous LLC names to come in and buy up single family homes. Like, I know, at least I am gleaning a certain, what we want to believe a corporation is, but as you said, like that's a real slippery slope. And it feels like, you were saying earlier, Sam, like you can't tell somebody what to do with their property, nor can you like dictate that somebody be a resident, and what they do. But if there is some kind of licensing board that can, again, I don't think anybody's too worried about people renting out rooms in their homes, the guest rooms, the ADUs, but it's the separate homes that's, the vector for investment. And if we have a way of making sure it's, people that we want running these things in our community, and if they have to reapply for that license yearly, it's something that we have to continue to want in our community, but that would be a way of.
And again, I think, I don't want to speak for all of us, and again, I'm gonna sort of put this out. I think we're all very interested in and committed to making sure that we find ways for people to stay in their homes, right? I think that was the whole purpose and point of the accessible dwelling unit and things like that, right? But it is that, how does someone potentially gain that? And then we didn't write it and we didn't say it, right? And then we've created a situation where things have gotten a little bit out of hand, right? And so I think that's just why we're trying to go really slow with this and kind of ask all of these questions and things like that. Before I get to you, any other, from what you've heard, right, comments about anything that's written here that we need to think about? All right, thank you. Cool.
So just to be clear, if someone has I'm not sure about the Airbnb, so this may be a very silly question, but if you had an apartment rental, could you Airbnb it and then stay with someone else every once in a while? If it was an apartment, it has to be owner occupied. Okay.
It's specifically prohibited in here to supplement.
I thought so, but I was starting
Potentially
to.
you could, yeah, it's a local sort of.
So what if you owned the apartments on Cottage Street, but they don't have any parking available? Would they be not allowed because it has to have a parking spot?
So that was one of the outstanding questions from our conversation was about parking requirements.
Okay.
So I think, I don't want to say we're leaning, but on the board is having no limitations on days and having no limitation on number, right? I've talked about the fire code, right, that I'll share with you. But in terms of those items that Chief Norris has said that he wants to see in here, right? And now parking, off-street parking.
Before we move on to that, just with the fire chief's recommendations, I think one of those was a landline. And that is pretty uncommon, I think, for people to have, for houses to have at this point. And I know that, I think the idea was the way calls are routed for 911 or, cell coverage in our city. And I've never been anywhere in Easthampton where I didn't have cell coverage. And so I'm just curious where that concern is coming from as a,
Yeah, so I think that's recommended, it's not required, right? So, yeah, he's not saying that that has to be something that's happening, right? I do think that your phone dies, you know, you still have some sort of, I mean, I think, like, I can't speak for him, but I mean, I think that's the general kind of idea of there's an emergency, way to get in touch. Where's my cell phone? It's upstairs. I can't go get my cell phone. I'm in the kitchen, right? There's a landline available.
like, figuring out how to dial a
Yeah.
landline
Yeah.
phone again.
And I'm gonna say right here, I mean, I'm gonna add
Directions.
directions.
Yeah.
It has to be a rotary landline. And you have to have
Nobody younger than
directions,
30 will know how to use it though.
24 foot or 24 point font.
I'm thinking
so everybody
50.
knows how to use that. No, yeah, so
Okay.
that's just a recommendation. It's not a required.
Got it. And then for the recommendation for the lockbox,
Yep.
I do have a lockbox at my rental. But I changed the code for safety reasons in between guests. And so I don't know if there'd be any, I totally makes sense as like a precaution, but I don't know if there's,
Fire locks box is not that. Fire
oh,
lock
okay.
box is a key
Just
that
for
the,
them.
that the fire chief has.
Got it.
And they go to your place.
Thank you.
It's like a commercial building.
Yeah, and they encourage older people in the community to voluntarily,
Okay.
sign up for that program.
It's like TSA luggage. They all have that key, even though you have your own code, right? Same way. Which makes me feel safe.
I think it's a good idea. I don't have any problem
I don't have
with
a
that.
problem with that.
Yeah,
I mean, we had the, good fortune of, I'm not gonna say, our fire alarm went off and they were able to get into the house, break down the door. There was no fire, there was just a faulty thing, right? And that saved us $1,000, right? Of not having a window or a door or anything like that, right? So I just think that that's, and the other just kind of added thing is you have a relationship with your fire department, right? So. Other question. So back to parking, off-street parking. Do we have thoughts about that?
I feel like I feel like the Cottage Street, the cultural district is a little different with that. The same thing with Main Street. I'm just thinking of where we have a lot of really historic apartments that wouldn't have included and still just don't think they should be excluded.
I mean, I agree. I think that a lot of the apartments on Cottage Street have parking in behind the buildings and I know zoning requires parking, at least now, until we change it, a certain amount of parking. So unless it was like something that was grandfathered in, it should have at least, I mean, one off-street parking is not ridiculous to say. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that because it does kind of make sense to have a place off the street if there's a snowstorm or whatever. Like, I feel like having an off-street parking, at least one off-street parking, is prudent.
So I know I'm gonna ask, we have a 3-bedroom house. I'm gonna rent 2 bedrooms out. I can only fit 1 car in my driveway.
There go stay with neighbors, I guess.
I'm asking the question. It's winter.
Do you want to know what the reality of that is? Based on somebody who has a 3-bedroom apartment that only allows 5 people and has 1 parking space. I have another driveway and I'll share my driveway with them when there's a snowstorm, if they have 2 cars. But generally people only rent. That's in
Sometimes they
general.
Uber.
Yeah, sometimes they bring no car.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
The way it's written currently is 1 for the short-term rental plus 1 for each additional dwelling unit on the property. But the licensing board could waive that if there were
Oh, that's good.
mitigating circumstances, like you own the property next door that has.
Yeah, as long as there's a way to waive it. That's
So are we good with what's written in here?
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's fair.
Good. Other, anything else? Those are the major ones. I think we need to go back and review some of the things that were written so we can get the language. Anything else? So we've talked a couple of different things. Do we need to add language around owner occupied versus not owner occupied?
And there's some in there now. It's,
Right.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're,
Oh, yeah, you even the definitions?
yeah. Because it seems like we're trying to delineate these, and so I just want to make sure that we're clear.
Okay. Someone brought this up earlier, but I should raise. Okay. Someone brought this up earlier, but I do see a difference in people with adjacent properties because you are your own short-term rental neighbor, much like an ADU on your property. It's right there. And I don't know if there's a way to put that language in there and delineate those different than someone who doesn't have eyes on the property at all times. So owner occupied or adjacent property or something like
Yeah, owner adjacent,
that. Owner adjacent.
owner next door. Okay, so we'll try to explore that as well as owner occupied, just so we're clear about that. What else?
Well, I know that we had talked about resident requirement. I'm a little hesitant on that just because I mean the whole there's the family component, right? Like what if you are a snowbird and you fly away to Florida in the winter, and maybe you decide that you're going to stay there, and then I don't know, like the resident piece, while I see some value to it, I think would be really difficult. I think it's opening like a very interesting can of worms that I don't know if we're prepared for yet.
And if we don't have it, we could be opening up a can of worms that we're not prepared for.
If Jared Kushner decides to come in and start buying up property, that would be a problem.
Can we limit? Like only one, you can only have one non-owner occupied short-term rental. If you want to put a limitation, like that way someone, not somebody can buy 5, they might buy 1, but. You can only buy 1. If you have the limit, it's just, you can only own one non-owner occupied.
Yeah, that would put the
Property
kibosh.
or rental itself?
Well, I want to go back to Mindy's situation. If she's next door, but she's not
So
in
she
that.
could buy another property now that's not connected to those properties. That's it, though. She can't buy 2.
She's occupied.
So, I own, told people, I own a very large property.
Right. But it's only
And
one
I was able to buy the house next door from some people who were not nice,
Okay,
right?
right, so it's
They were not
adjacent.
good for my neighborhood, right? I'm just gonna put that right out. And so what I'm hoping is that what we've been doing is way better for the neighborhood than what was going on before. And so,
Right, so I'll just back up. So she only owns one non-owner occupied property now. So that's fine.
And it's
No, that's fine.
adjacent too.
And it's adjacent.
Right, that was my question.
Yeah,
And
so
I
it
just wanna
fits
make
into
sure
it.
that-
well, I don't know. I mean, it's all getting for me. a
Well,
little
I
like-
have
It
the
happens
sa-
to be connected. It's
I have the
just a
same concern
separate
you
lot.
do. I don't think someone should buy more than one non-owner occupied adjacent property in the city. Like it just, because that's someone just buying up houses. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid. Okay.
And what about my situation?
You're living in one.
I live in one, but then the other one is
Yeah,
a
but
So
then
block
that's
away.
you only have
One.
one unowner occupied property.
Right,
So don't buy another.
so
Oh,
you-
I can't.
so
I
you would
won't.
be
Okay,
good.
okay,
You're good.
let's come back together
I just want to remind everybody that we're in a housing crisis right
Yeah.
now. There is limited stock in housing. We
Yeah.
want someplace to live. We've got a real desperate population. We've got a growing homeless population in the area. If you want to see what we're dealing with, go down to the community center, go up to Manna Kitchen, go to the Northampton Survival Center, and see the desperation that we're dealing with as we continue to find, like
Yeah.
buying property and talking about buying second properties, first properties, like this is keeping people out of homes in our community. When we're talking about guest house ADUs, it's just not an issue. But when you start talking about, well, what about the house next to me? Well, then what about the house on the other side of you? And what about the one right behind you? Why not start a little compound? And like, that's where it's going to keep people from being able to stay here. It's going to stop people who are just starting out their life, trying to start a family, from being able to get a home. Look at the average rentals in the area, and we're taking stock away from anything that's going to keep that depressed. And it's apples and oranges. And like, I don't think anybody here is the big egregious aggressor with this or anything, but we are in a crisis and we're not getting help from outside. We've got to look to our community to solve this. And if we're all looking out for how we're going to make it, we're not going to make it.
So do you have a suggestion based on that, like how to, I hear what you're saying and I value what you're saying.
I just think that
Yeah.
when
That's what
you're
I'm trying to
looking
learn.
at housing as investments, housing as ways of making a living, that is something that we have decided is normal and okay. We're saying something that somebody needs to live, something that somebody needs to survive, to thrive, to have a life, to pursue happiness, is something that I can make money off of. Like, there's an equal exchange there, but then there's going a step further. And again, I'm not calling anybody out here. I don't think anybody here is the problem, but we have to start looking at maybe unorthodox solutions, or maybe not looking at what's best for us, best for our family, but one step further, what's going to help Easthampton be secure, sustainable, and resilient in the face of all of this nonsense going on around us. We need to be prepared to deal with all of this. And if we're worried about buying extra properties, it's not going to be taking care of our neighbor who is worried about how they're going to keep a roof over their head or how they're going to feed themselves. Apples and oranges, but I think we really have to keep that in perspective.
Get your hand up.
Yeah, you can come back to me. I can't remember.
I just want to speak to that a little bit. Easthampton, I believe, has been a bit ahead of the curve in regards to trying to get more housing. Massachusetts governor just signed new ordinances that are now trickling down into all the cities, to allow tiny houses, to allow ADUs more easily, loosening up the laws around them. But Easthampton has other ordinances that they've already been working on for a year to get more housing before Massachusetts even signed this bill. So you might want to just do a little research about some of those other things, because that aren't here today in this ordinance meeting, but we are ahead of the curve in regards to adding housing to Easthampton compared to many other communities. Because I've done a lot of research about that.
Great. Thank you for that. Your point is well taken. I think that's what's underlying all of this and some of my apprehension, because I think we keep coming back to, I'm trying to figure out what's the right thing so that we can make sure that we don't create a situation where we are, people find all sorts of loopholes, right? And we look for all sorts of ways of taking care of ourselves and whatnot. And sometimes that can have a detrimental effect on other people, right? So I think we've tried to acknowledge that. And I think that that's still very much forefront for me, right? So, yeah.
And I would say, this, we're in a little bit of a catch-22, because we've made Easthampton a desirable place to live, so then property values go up. And I think that point is taken, and I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can make smart regulations around short-term rentals, and I know that we can work. I mean, we have, all of the schools that we just decommissioned are all going to be affordable housing and a mix of other types of housing as well. And, we do have some pretty big housing projects coming online in the next few years. So this is something that we're working on now, and we have let some things go in the past. There was a really creative idea to have little cottages on a property. And I was one of the few people that was like, wow, that's a really cool idea, because you could do short-term rentals in these little cottages, like down on this little property. Which, was that you?
Yes, it was.
I thought so. And that was a really cool idea.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and we had neighbors coming and saying there were naked people running around and stuff. It was like this crazy thing. Yeah, it was crazy. It was, right? It was crazy. It was crazy. We have let some things slide, which doesn't mean that we can't revive them. It doesn't mean that we can't keep working on creative ideas. We did do ADUs, and a lot of places don't allow multifamily houses to do ADUs, and we did, because we feel like that's important. So I do think that we can, work on this and come up with some smart regulations that will, protect people's investments, protect the quality of life for, thriving and vibrant downtown, and also work on making sure that we can find solutions for people that are struggling and help that situation as well. So, I'm hoping that we can do both of those things together. And I don't see them as mutually exclusive. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I'm wondering, since obviously the big concern is people coming in, buying, as Easthampton even continues to grow and get more popular, I'm wondering if there's a way of, like, for lack of a better term, like grandfathering in homes that are already owned by the person. I'm not sure if that's a slippery slope as well, because maybe they were long-term saying, and now they want to switch to short-term, but I feel like if there's, a way of keeping that as part of, like, up until the date that we pass this, these things are acceptable because they were already being used this way. They're not taken away from the housing market, and we want to, keep the housing market protected by limiting things in the future, I guess is what I'm wondering, if there's a way of.
I just want to say, once again, in regards to, we also were one of the first cities to change the ordinance a couple years ago to allow the ADUs to be built by right. Not all of them are short-term rentals. And quite honestly, they even allowed you to go to the ZBA to make a second one if you wanted to. And honestly, if I could ever get a second one, I would not short-term rent it. Just saying for the record, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. I realize there's a housing crisis, and I would want to have a rental for people. Because, yeah, I've seen it.
Okay, thank you. One last comment here.
I just think there's a tendency to, in our society today, to like individualize systemic problems, and the housing crisis is so real, but the short-term rental thing is a boogeyman about it. It's like, my wife is from Madrid, and that's an international tourist destination. There you can rent your place 365 days a year. And there you really do have people who are buying apartments to rent them. But here, like, we need to educate ourselves with data, and I'm happy to spearhead this. The numbers are not there to support investment activity. I could make more money if my case is special because I have a very small but very, very nice brand new building. I could make more money with much less stress if I would long-term rent it. I short-term rent it because of the flexibility of use for my family. But the numbers there's maybe a few cases in our whole town where you could take a house and make more money with the short term than the long term. And the reason is because you can't occupy it every night. There's not the demand, and I can prove it to you with tons of data. So I understand the desire to protect, but it just doesn't exist here. There is a capitalist break on this project here in Easthampton. So.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. So I think some suggestions have been made, right? So we're gonna go back, make some edits to this, and then for the next meeting, we will have another draft. And I will invite the police chief as well as the fire chief here to address their concerns. We will add those pieces into this, and then go from there. Other comments?
And I have one.
Yep.
I just real quick, I just want to say that the housing crisis exists for those of us who own the house as well. And so I just, that's it.
Yeah, no. That again, I think we're trying to manage all of those different needs, right? And I think we're very aware of that, right? We have a lot of seniors in Easthampton who are trying to stay in Easthampton. And we have a lot of longtime residents who don't have homes, right? They relied on long-term rentals, right? And so I think a lot of people are just feeling very, very anxious. And like I said, we're super aware of what's happening over on Nashawanek Street, with people being, their rent's gone up 50%, right? And so it's very real, right? People are being evicted so that people can update the apartments and basically rent them for more now, right? Even though they didn't make those adjustments when people were living there, right? So I think all of those things are just very real, right? And I think everyone's like, we're trying to figure out how to survive, right? And we're doing what we can here with this ordinance to try to help people, but also make sure we don't oopsie-daisy, right? And create something that we weren't anticipating. Okay. So, any last questions? Anybody online have anything that they want to add? No? Do we want to set another meeting time so that we can? Ready?
So we have another one on April 1st, but that is for zoning.
That's for zoning.
Yep. Just in case anybody sees that advertised, it's not for short-term rental.
That's zoning. Yep. Okay.
I feel like, do we have one on the books for April 8th? I feel like we do.
Yeah, I think we do because that was that was what we wanted to do before, but you can't do April 8th.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
I didn't.
I was like, why do I have that? But then I was like, oh, I know why.
Right.
So I'm gonna delete that.
Me too.
Yeah. What's on the 15th?
Tax day.
I could do the 15th, but I would have to do 5.
I can do the 15th too.
At 5?
Yeah, I could probably do 5.
Community development block grant park.
Oh, yeah, let's not do that day then.
Spice it up.
I mean, I could probably give you something every night.
What about Monday?
14th.
Yeah.
Yep, I can do that.
Oh, it's there. Can we go a little
Wow.
maybe?
6?
Yeah, 6 would be good.
Right. So we'll do that. Lindsay, on the 14th, we'll try to get those room. I can't make promises, but and again, we've heard everything that you've all said. We're doing the best we can to accommodate and just very mindful. Right?
And this seems, it's getting so much closer. It feels almost finished. You guys have done a tremendous job.
Yeah.
Going from that enormous document to
All right,
this,
all
it's
right,
like-
all
it's
right.
major.
Okay.
I'm not saying, I mean that's
I
a
know.
lot of work, you can tell.
Yeah.
It's great.
I want to thank our planning department and our building inspector, right? They really did a lot to put that together. So kudos, hats off to them for
Thanks for the
putting
time.
that together.
Yep.
Great. I'll take a motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
All in favor? Oh, second, yeah. That's,
We both did it.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.